This Voice of San Diego podcast is brought to you by Manilatos Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. M&M is run by Tony Manilatos, Bob Nelson, and Kelly Murphy Lampkin, who bring a vast network and decades of advertising and public relations experience to businesses, nonprofits, government agencies, and campaigns. M&M bridges the gap between clients and the people whose influence matters most. M&M is a full-service agency that helps clients develop their strategy and launch cost-effective tactics. The firm specializes in public affairs PR and advertising with an emphasis on media relations, crisis communications, community outreach, coalition building, broadcast, print, direct mail, and digital advertising. Our reporters at Voice of San Diego have certainly heard a lot from Bob and Tony over the years. Tony, Bob, and Kelly are supporters of Voice of San Diego. Learn more about their firm at mnmadpr.com. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Cocoa. My name is Scott Lewis, and I'm here with my friend, Andrew Keatts.
What's up, my man?
What's up, brother?
Not much.
So, I don't know if you heard, marijuana is now legal to purchase, sort of, in San Diego.
I caught word of this on the local news. I made it to one local news broadcast that did mention this.
It happened to correspond with a time when I watched TV more often, you know, sitting with the families and all that, and you're watching it. And there was a lot of stories out there about marijuana being legal suddenly. Now, first of all, it'd been legal.
Sure.
What changed is it's legal to purchase.
My favorite story I saw was day 2, sales still going steady. It was like, how many days are we going to do this? Day 56, still marijuana steady. Being sold.
I think what got me, I tried to express this a few ways, was there was like kind of an assumption underneath that something new had happened as far as like, well, what are we going to do about people who might drive after ingesting marijuana?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an old problem. I just want people to know that's an old problem.
Yes.
Marijuana is not new to California.
Right.
Marijuana has been available in through various avenues for quite some time. And so this idea that, you know, something big was changing and that we should maybe think about how we're going to screen people for whether they've ingested marijuana appropriately is kind of an old problem.
Yeah.
But I get it. Things have changed. So we're going to start talking about that, I guess, more openly. And that, I think, corresponds with what's really happening, which is there's a big coming out, right? There's a big opening, change that way.
Yes. I do think there's something new going on here. I mean, it's a little bit old hat at this point because it's been legal in Colorado. And it's because it's been legal in Washington. And if you've traveled to those states, you maybe have some familiarity with it. But, I mean, the 18-year-old version of me that still lives inside me just cannot believe what's going on. Like,
I know, right?
Like, you can go into a store with nothing but the clothes you wore to work and just go buy marijuana now. I understand where you're coming from, that you want to tamp down people's dismay and the short distance between the kind of their observations and prohibitionist arguments.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to allow people to be a little bit amazed by this. There's a stand-up comedian who at one point said that this is the first time that the government allowed something simply by going, fine, whatever. Like, we can't stop it. Just do whatever you want.
Now, hold on. Now, so I am totally on board with the idea that something incredible has happened, like something very difficult for everybody's. And I've been saying it for some time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure people were quite prepared for how the cultural shift that was coming.
Yeah.
I guess what bothered me is this idea that there would be this
That there's this new host of issues that we have to sort out.
And I don't doubt there will be people who try it because it's this legalization has made it more available, or whatever. But I think the vast majority of people who were going to go to the stores are just excited that they can go to a store instead of Joe or the delivery service that seemed legal, maybe wasn't.
I didn't catch the local news. I hope there's somebody out there, some local news program, probably somewhere in this state, got the choice interview, which was somebody that they interviewed somebody who was like, yeah, I never tried it before, but the store's open, so I figured I'll go buy some chocolate. That I do want to see that. I didn't see that in any of my programs. Everything I saw was people just being like, yeah, I've always smoked pot and now I can buy it here.
Yeah, and the city and it's gonna be really interesting to watch a lot of things. We're gonna go through a few of the things to pay attention to. Does the city, collect these taxes? Do people look at the tax that is being charged on some of these? There's still the medical. You can just, if you have a medical recommendation, you can go that route and pay 5% tax, or you go the just walk in route and buy it, and that's a much higher tax, right? So that's going to be an issue. Did they charge too much taxes? San Diego, the city of San Diego, I praised them on Twitter. I got a little bit of backlash because I said, look, there's a lot of cities that weren't ready for this, that stores weren't open and they weren't collecting, they weren't making it happen. They hadn't prepared. They had 14 months. They didn't get it ready. San Diego was not one of those. And I said, look, I give the city a lot of trouble, but that seemed impressive to me. Now others shot back and with this basic argument, which you've had, which is that maybe the taxes were too high. Maybe they didn't get it right. Maybe they didn't offer enough permitting, all that sort of stuff. And maybe you're right. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I commend the city for taking action and getting a regime in place. Once there's a regime in place, you can work backwards or forwards and kind of turn the dials to get it right. I do.
So I won the argument.
Well, I think you're going a little bit overboard in your praise.
Sure.
I mean, it's good for them for having
all I
done
said
something.
was, I'm glad they did it. Everybody's so acculturated to me being like so snarky that I just say like one nice thing and you guys are like, whoa, calm down.
Well, you have a well-developed and, in my opinion, virtuous belief that politicians too often praise themselves for passing a piece of legislation.
Yeah.
And treating that as the accomplishment, as opposed to waiting for the outcome itself and celebrating that outcome.
Fair point.
And I think that this is another instance of that. If in 6 months it's clear that this regime that we have put in place is a disaster, then they do not deserve kudos for having gotten there first.
Okay. So, and my response to that is like, well, you have to start. You can't. There's that old saying in internet and startup entrepreneurship that if you launch and you're happy with your launch, you launch too late. You got to start and then figure out, the tweaks and changes that need to come from that. Basically, the city of San Diego launched not only with the permits. There's about 11 dispensaries out there now permitted and authorized. There's 17 ready to go. There's another 10 in the process or something. And, is that the right number? There's a bunch of business, up to 40 businesses that can supply, distribute, test the facility or the substance in the city. Is that the right number? Are they in the right spaces? Those are all the questions that we're talking about. But a disaster, what would a disaster even look like? That nobody's buying and the black market flourishes, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the numbers?
This is just on the tax numbers. So the city of San Diego started with a 5% sales tax, which goes automatically to 8%, I think in July 2019. And then there's some language in there that allows the city council to make certain decisions to adjust it from there. But it automatically began at 5% and escalates to 8%.
That's on top of the
July
state?
2019. So that's on top of 15% state tax and a 7.75% sales tax, which gets us in July 2019 to 35.75% and 27.75% right now. So that puts us above Oregon and in the ballpark of Colorado and Washington. Oregon has a 20% cumulative tax rate, effective tax rate. Colorado 36%, Washington 37%.
Well, Oregon doesn't have a sales tax, right?
Yeah. Well, right. That's true.
Yeah. So that's the question. Is it going to get buried, or are people just going to? It's these medical cards have become these kind of like Costco membership cards, right? So basically, do you want to pay the $60 to see the doctor in the place
And then save.
the taxes for the rest of the year, or do you just want the convenience of just buying?
Yeah. If you're somebody who's going to buy once every 2 years on a lark, maybe it doesn't make sense for you to pay this membership fee, essentially.
Yeah.
Costco membership fee.
Well, and then right as this news came out, a couple of days, and I think there's a good argument you could blame CNN for showing people token on New Year's Eve, but
There was that real that they had somebody with a gas mask on that was with a gas mask connected to a bong?
Yeah, that's what somebody said.
That is. I kind of ignored it because I was like, that can't be real. That doesn't happen on CNN. It doesn't. Wolf Blitzer doesn't broadcast alongside a man wearing a gas mask.
It wasn't the proudest moment, but it does remind me of when people are, they win the divisional series of the American League,
Yeah.
Baseball, and they're spraying champagne on themselves in the locker room. I mean, like, don't do that.
Right.
Stop that. There's some people with alcohol problems and stuff. This isn't the way that we should de facto celebrate stuff. All right. Anyway, a couple days after this happens, Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, poor beleaguered Jeff Sessions.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Beleaguered.
He
It's awesome because he beleaguered him.
Yeah.
and then called him beleaguered. Anyway, sorry. That's a joke from June.
He rescinds a memo, Obama era memo that had given U.S. attorneys and prosecutors from the federal level. Remember, there's state prosecutors and there's federal prosecutors. Locally, we have a U.S. attorney who enforces federal law, and that person is chosen by the attorney general and by the president, and they switch out with new presidents, right? We had an old attorney general who didn't like, or a U.S. attorney who didn't like marijuana and was responsible for the big crackdown of the 2011 era, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he rescinded a memo that Eric Holder had sent out, his team, Cole, had sent out to U.S. attorneys and said, hey, you guys, if there's a good regulation going on in these places, back off. We don't need to enforce these federal prohibition on marijuana. And Sessions made a big deal of pulling this back, and everybody around the country was like, Cory Gardner, the senator from Colorado, was on the floor of the Senate just making a lot of noise about this. He's a Republican.
It was a pretty serious speech he gave.
Yeah.
It's like a 4-minute speech.
Now, so let's have some real talk. First of all, it's a memo.
Yeah.
It's not a law.
Mm-hmm.
This is how precarious the relationship of federal versus state marijuana laws is. Amanda Chicago Lewis, the reporter who writes for Rolling Stone, a bunch of other places, she put it in perspective like this. Just to be clear, California was almost certainly not protected under that pot memo that Sessions rescinded today. The 2003 or 13 Cole memo required states that legalized to implement strong and effective regulatory and enforcement systems. And I think she was a little snarky when she said we don't have those yet and have never had those, which is true. It was Wild West for a long time.
Yeah.
And so, basically what this brings, it's kind of like the DACA issue. It's basically Sessions saying, I dare you to legalize this or make federal law consistent.
And in much like the DACA thing, it of course is difficult to see exactly, and maybe not even that fruitful to game out how this plays out in Congress. But I do think it's in the realm of possibility that where you had seen a steady march for more states decriminalizing, more states approving medicinal use, more states approving recreational use, and it seemed like there was a steady march to a change at the national level, that in fact it's at least possible that rescinding this memo and exacerbating the tension between federal law and state law may in fact be the thing that forces Congress to actually act and make a decision rather than just having this hodgepodge of different state.
I mean, we'll
state
see.
laws.
I think the most immediate impact might
Maybe
be,
not now, but eventually.
Yeah, it might be on the investment world, though, that's still,
Yeah.
dabbling and still a little worried about federal law, the attorneys and the other people involved in making investments.
One more reason to get scared off if you're kind
Yeah.
of a straight businessman who decides not to get involved.
Absolutely. And so the California's pot czar, the chief of the Bureau of Cannabis Control, do you know we have one of those now?
I did not know that.
Her name is Lori Ajax. She said, quote,
Appointed? Governor appointee?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll continue to move forward with the state's regulatory processes covering both medicinal and adult use cannabis consistent with the will of California's voters while defending our state's laws to the fullest extent.
Well, and so this is interesting also because it puts the decision at the feet of individual U.S. attorneys that represent specific areas. And so, for instance, the Denver U.S. attorney came out and said, we're not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
No change here. We happen to be in a position where there's no one to call and say, like, what about you? Because we don't have a U.S. attorney right now.
We have an interim.
We have an interim, right? Which is, I mean, I guess an interim could do anything that has the full power of the office, but it's a more difficult place to make complicated policy decisions that are going to put you at odds with your local elected officials when you're in an interim position.
And let's remember the crackdown of 2000. I think there was one in like 9 and then 11. Basically, Laura Duffy, who was U.S. attorney appointed by Obama, she had gotten some complaints from people that marijuana had gotten into the hands of the wrong people.
Yeah.
And she looks across the city. You might remember several years ago, there were hundreds of dispensaries. There was one right in Ocean Beach, right on Newport Avenue. They were everywhere. There were signs everywhere. There was tons of these places completely unregulated.
Mm-hmm.
And she came in and said no, and raided a bunch of them, and then a bunch of others shut down, and then the city started cracking down, and that's what happens. And what she pointed to then was, you don't have these regulators, there's no regulation, there's no plan. These are bad, and also they're getting in the hands of the wrong places. This is not what you do.
Yeah.
And then she even took it a step further. Again, this is under Obama. She even threatened city officials in various jurisdictions that if they legalized or regulated this stuff, that they were actually abetting drug trafficking.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of weirdness there, again, under Obama, with that U.S. attorney. So that's how far and so how much latitude a U.S. attorney can have on this. And so, the question is, who's going to be our U.S. attorney? What do they think? Well, it's been a year. We don't know, and we don't have a permanent one.
Also, we don't really get a say in the matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so it's
totally
not
federal.
It's not like it's a campaign issue.
This is the king's representative here.
Right.
Yes. So we'll see, but it would present a different standoff this time because it is regulated this time. These are officially permitted. These are taxed, and these are establishment places. So raiding them and challenging them would be much bigger deal than the place that was unregulated. All right, our hero of the week.
This goes to Martin S. Lindsay. He's a guy who has, for the last few years, kept up a website called Classic San Diego and is now working on a book of the same title. Kinsey featured him in the Culture Report this week. Awesome. He basically just collects all the ephemera of long-held food institutions and traditions in San Diego and Tijuana. And I'm into that sort of stuff, and it's usually hard to find good, verified information on that sort of thing. You end up getting a lot of wives' tales and sort of urban legends. So I think it's pretty cool. I've been sifting through his website ever since I read the Culture Report, and I'm into it. I dig it. I think it's cool.
Our goat of the week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
All right, this goes to Councilman Scott Sherman from the city of San Diego. Look, love Councilman Sherman, his honor. I'm into fishing now. He's a fisherman.
Yeah.
He's plain spoken.
Maybe he could teach you how to catch a fish.
Yeah. It'd be nice. We gave him a platform to talk about after this vacation rental mess where the city couldn't make a decision after a marathon meeting. He's done. He's done with this nonsense. And we gave him a platform to let loose, vent some steam about it. And, good points. He had some insights, observations, felt like unions were getting too strong, people weren't leading, whatever. It was important. But then this week, he came out and he pushed for a new way to get the city council president seat.
Yeah, basically just seniority.
Yeah, so he's like...
It just rotates and it goes to whoever is the senior most person.
So one of the things he was most upset about, of course, is that he was really into this housing problem. He felt like he was finally getting some momentum. He was doing it bipartisan. It was getting national news, and he was gonna help solve the housing crisis. And we had him in here to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then they just took him off the chairmanship of that committee because he's a Republican.
Right.
And he hated that. And I know what that must have felt like. And that's why, unloading like he did, I think was important to listen to his concerns and what he thought was going on and what was changed and all that stuff. But then to say like, okay, we shouldn't have a council president the way we have it. We should just rotate it just according to seniority. Look, nothing according to seniority is good. Is there anything that's like just de facto seniority that works in the world?
Right. Also, like,
this isn't the Mormon church like presidency.
Also, like, you didn't have a big problem with the council president selection process over the last 2 times that it was used by Republicans to elect somebody.
I think they brought up that they were upset before that it should just be rotating, like the county board of supervisors does.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't be the only people to do it.
Yeah.
But proposing a procedural change after the procedure in question burns you is always going to seem like a little bit of sour grapes, and a good time to bring out the old saw that elections have consequences.
Well, but also,
you win. You lose. It's politics.
A primal scream too, like you said, of the Republicans sort of seeing this change happening, and more. This town is going Democrat, and it's really strong in so many different areas. And it's like they had, like you called it, an interregnum between the Filner administration and now of this, like, well, maybe they still have some power.
It's kind of like I remember when Bob Filner was elected mayor, Liam's headline was "A changing city chooses Filner," and it's like it's still a changing city, and in the long term, we still expect the city to go to the same place based on demographic changes. But in the meantime, there had been a Republican mayor, and the Republicans on the city council had been able to maneuver to have some sort of control over city council president. And now it's starting to get back to the point of people recognizing that they're not really in control anymore, or they won't be soon. And I think that's kind of what I see playing out here.
Right. All right. Thanks to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. Stay tuned for Jordan Bean, who's running for city council in District 2. We're first of our many candidates for the 2018 races. Sponsoring the podcast today is Sempra Services. Greenhouse gas emissions impact us all. In this new podcast series, former San Diego County Planning Commissioner and renewable energy and transportation expert Peter Norby explores best practices for reducing greenhouse gases and making real progress toward a healthier future on the local level. In this episode, Norby sits down with a renowned economist and Point Loma Nazarene professor, Dr. Lynn Reeser, to discuss the implications of government-controlled energy in San Diego. Visit sempraservices.com to learn more, and tune into the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. All right, we are joined in the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio by Jordan Bean. He is a candidate for District 2 City Council, San Diego City Council. We're going to try to bring a bunch of these candidates in, right?
Yeah, we've got a few months.
Put them
there's
through the ringer.
A lot of races, a lot of candidates. We'll see. They'll have to.
Sorry, it's coming so early because you're going to get such a boom and a bubble from this experience. A bump, that's what it's called.
I'm really going to ride this Voice of San Diego wave all the way to
election.
So I really appreciate it.
But it might dissipate by the time it matters. I just sorry to let you down there.
You're like fundraising roles. It'll be like the electricity in Christmas Vacation was just like spinning.
Yeah,
exactly.
So welcome, Jordan.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
You live in PB, is it?
Live in Pacific Beach, Crown Point. Have lived in PB the entire time. I've just kind of moved up and down one street when I first moved here, you lived with a couple of dudes. My then girlfriend, now wife, came out. We got a, crappy 1-bedroom apartment. Now we live in a slightly nicer 2-bedroom apartment. And just kind of the standard operating procedure for those that live in the beach.
A lot of people move to the coast and then they get farther east as they get older.
It seems like the people that grew up in San Diego, they follow that kind of inland wave of state, go to SDSU, live in Mission, live in PB, live in OB, and then they go buy a house in La Mesa or wherever and move, kind of recedes back east as time goes on.
But you've avoided that.
I've avoided that, yeah.
That's what you did, kind of.
That's basically what I did.
Yeah.
Started in PB, set roots in Golden Hill. By the time I'm 50, I'll be in Alpine.
All right. So, Jordan, you're running for city council. You're also let's get your backgrounds settled. You were the media guy for the Chargers, and not media as in liaison for media like radio and TV. You literally produce media for them.
Yeah, so we had an in-house digital media production group that I helped start in 2012. I had been formerly with the Washington Football Club. Came out here to join the Chargers, and we went from doing a couple of post-game interviews and a couple of small features to 2 television shows, one of which I hosted with Nick Hardwick, and did a bunch of interviews and had a lot of fun doing it. But
so I have a lot of thoughts about NFL media.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon.
So Scott has a stump speech. I don't know. Some people, if you've ever been to like an Elks Lodge in town, you've probably seen it. And it features heavily the role of NFL-sponsored media going direct to their consumers and bypassing local media.
Yeah, the idea being like...
That's the whole thing. I just did it much quicker.
The whole idea of these places that sort of realized that, well, they could do media. Like, there's no reason to let all of these media companies get all the attention and money for their content. Like, the Chargers or the whatever NFL team has access to all of its own news.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, a subgroup of celebrities could create their own tabloid, and they would know when they were pregnant first or when they were divorced.
Athletes did that.
Yeah.
The Players Tribune is that.
And so that's what I was kind of predicting would come, and like the NFL really showed it. And you were the guy for the Chargers.
Yeah. Well, the NFL's in such an interesting position because you only have, if you can count preseason game, 20 games.
Yeah.
So it's a very truncated schedule. So you have all this other time to fill. It's all the games are produced nationally, so it's not like you can get your own RSN or something like that, like baseball teams and hockey teams and basketball teams do. So your other avenue to create content and get those sponsorship dollars is by creating your own digital media department. Now, I was a print journalism major at American University, which at this point is about as I don't think I'll ever write a word in print, unsurprisingly. And so I thought that it was an opportunity to get a good job when you're 21, 22 years old, and you take it and you go from there and you create some fun stuff, and you get to be on the field when the games are going on. It's at 22, it's pretty cool. But
and I'm not judging. I think it would be. I can imagine how much fun it would be.
Could you imagine working in media where you could just get the information you want?
Just directly, yeah.
Like you just get it.
Just walk down the hall and ask.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike Pence created this, and when he was governor of Indiana, he created this news source, and it became this big controversy. But like, that's the whole idea, is like, all the insider stuff. Like, you could actually do it well in a different way, and it was all across the country. There's going to be experiment. I had no idea that the one who would do it the weirdest would be the president of the United States.
And he wouldn't need a website, just all through social media.
In this weird way. Okay. So you were also you would also be the one that like Spanos would give an interview to when he wouldn't, the owner of the Chargers, Dean Spanos, president. And sometimes big announcements would come out of that. You would be the first to ask him about stadium stuff or whatever, right?
Yeah. And it was interesting. We did write those questions. We knew the general topic, but it wasn't. We were not given a list of here's what you're going to ask, and go from there. We would come up with the questions and figure that out. And it would be tough as somebody who was a team employee to then listen to the conversation afterwards about this as somebody who, I think you yourself said this guy gets all these great scoops, and it's like, well, I can't say anything back because I'm a member of the team, but it was at some point you were also doing a job that you were getting paid for and enjoy, but it is a very strange scenario, and I figured why not make it stranger by deciding to run for office instead.
And I'm going to let you, I know you want to keep going, but let me just do a couple more questions.
Absolutely.
Couple more questions? How many more?
This is interesting to me. I've been thinking about this a lot.
All right.
Now, so that's what I wanted to ask you. So I would imagine that they had to have some respect for the idea that it being independent or being somewhat independent would produce better content. So did they let you? What were the weirdest moments where they're like, yeah, you need to not say that?
Well, I think it was more. There were times where we would say, we're not going to talk about that because that looks like we are some sort of state-run organ. If we have that, if we put that interview out or cover that topic, we're not going to do that.
So there was a consciousness that you should make it more authentic.
I mean,
as best you can.
my 4 years of print journalism classes at least had some impression on me that there is a certain line that you should not try to cross, and you understand your role, and it's rainbows and sunshine, but then again, you also do lose games, and when I was there with the Chargers, by the end, they were unfortunately losing more games than they were winning. So you take that into account because you can't massage a huge loss or something like that. But also when it came to like topics that they would have maybe say, hey, let's do a sit-down interview for this. It's like, that's not, we will look worse if we do this.
One of the things you guys did was this sort of TikTok of the draft pick of Joey Bosa. Was that you, or was that it was like this long piece?
Oh, that was a Ricky Henny. That was the long form first person interview. Yeah,
I had never seen anything like that. All right, let's move on. So the team moves. How did you get that news?
So I got it like pretty much everybody else. I was out having an adult beverage at a bar and came across the wire, and then there were some inklings that it was going to happen.
So you didn't know?
We knew, we had an idea that something might be coming down the line, and then the next day later on you say you're in at 6:00 tomorrow, and off we go. And so it was a whirlwind day. It was so strange because I had already decided a year prior when we did this whole dance, when the game of musical chairs was being played in Houston, I was there when that happened, and one of even a more surreal event as that whole thing was going on. Were
you in the room when Dean's up there with Mark Davis?
When they literally walked over the body of the city of St. Louis to congratulate themselves on moving the Rams to L.A. It was the whole thing was surreal. And at that point, I had already decided, even a little bit prior to that this was not the path that I wanted to be following. It just wasn't
the idea. The path being to be with the NFL.
Yeah, to be with the NFL, and that this was not where my passion was. But it got even more surreal that I know that it happened in the middle of January, that I'd already had my announcement date in my head when I was going to announce. So I'm in this whole thing knowing that I was already moving and not moving, I should say, that I was going to stay and run for office in District 2. So to be like kind of a passive participant in all of this, knowing that my life wasn't going to be as completely insane as everybody else's was a strange scenario to be rolling through.
And so it was just a matter of you deciding when to tell them that you weren't going.
Yeah, then I had to have the difficult conversation and say, listen, I'm not going to go. And they were incredibly kind. I have to say, they allowed me to kind of stick around and help them out in the last couple of months that they were in town. And for me, the reason I am in San Diego is because of that job opportunity with the Chargers. I had always felt like San Diego was a great club that you could only get into if you're on the list. It isn't like you had a job here. So when I was with the Redskins, we played the Chargers in 2010. We're going to go fire a coach. Billy Volek's throwing touchdown passes. They're on their way to the playoffs. I'm sitting in shorts in early January at Qualcomm. I'm thinking, why would anybody want to live anywhere else?
Yeah.
So jump at the opportunity. So I will always be thankful that they gave me that chance. And then they didn't, I said to my wife the day after I informed my boss at the end of the day, said I could come home without a job today. Like we let's prepare ourselves for that situation. But I helped kind of run out the string and as things got more surreal moving on.
So to run for office, you have to have some level of security. You got to feel like you're okay financially. Are you? Like, how do you make a decision like that?
Yeah, I think that, for somebody like myself, my wife and I don't have kids yet, which makes it a little bit easier. We have 2 dogs, so that's a little bit easier of a decision to make.
Yeah.
And then it's been interesting because my wife is also kind of doing the same thing. She started her own all natural health and beauty company at the same time that I decided to run for office. So we're both kind of like going for this goal at the same time. And then sometimes where, ships passing in the night. So it actually, these kind of political marriages, in a sense, can be difficult if, the wife or husband is always at home.
Yeah.
You're wondering what's going on, but she's been so busy doing what she's been doing that it's made things a little bit easier. And we saved some money. We knew this was going to happen. And I've been working part-time and actually just took a position with UCSD to help them as they transition over to Division I in athletics. So that's going to be a lot of fun moving forward as I also am running for office. But it just seemed like, why not take a bet on yourself? Why not take a leap? This seemed like the perfect time to do it, the perfect environment to do it. And living in District 2, the perfect place to do it.
All right. So I'm a resident of District 2, voter.
It's a tough district.
Yeah.
You didn't pick an easy one.
I didn't pick an easy one. You're right. But there are some
involved people.
Yes.
I think Lori Zaff, she was in the other district. She moved over there.
Yeah.
Remember, she came in and she was like, I had no idea. Like this, it's just, there's so much intense issues, so many, just polemics all the time, and so many people who are very active and make it their, life to be involved in these questions. So, what's your pitch to them?
So, one of the reasons that I'm running is that I feel like I represent, or I'm trying to represent, a group of people that are not really represented at City Hall right now when it comes to people my age. I'm an older millennial at 33, but when you look at who is on City Council right now, there's really nobody that represents that age group, even though we're 27% of the total voting population, which is second highest in the city. And in District 2, where the median age is 34, a lot of young people that are there, and we have more than the city average of people like 30 to 34. And those are the people that want to know what their future in the city is going to be like. Are they ever going to be able to afford a house? Are they ever going to be able to get a job that will pay for them to raise a family and put down roots? This is a city that is kind of in transition in that regard. And I feel like the message that that resonates with folks is, do you want your kids and grandkids to be able to stay in the city they grew up in? Or do you want to have a relationship with them living in Phoenix or Fresno, and it's FaceTime and it's over the phone, or it's a long flight, or do you want them up the street so that Sunday dinner is a little bit more manageable?
That's interesting. So you're trying to make a case. You're clearly aware that there's a lot of older voters, but you're trying to make a case for representing a younger group by appealing to them as well.
Yeah, you have to talk to everybody. I'm running to represent everybody. I feel like people are starting to understand the housing crisis in the city, the effects of it in not only in the state, but here in San Diego. And it's starting to come home. It's now showing up at Thanksgiving and Christmas. I was on the phone with somebody the other day who was visiting their daughter in Seattle. She's worried about increasing rent at her place because they're going to jump it up. She was visiting her daughter in Seattle who grew up here, but she and her boyfriend had to move to Seattle because they couldn't find a good job here and couldn't find a place to rent. So these are everyday examples of a city that is becoming more and more unaffordable by the day. I had to update my kind of talking points about how expensive PB is because the median housing value went from $769 to $836 just over the course of like 2 months. And so I think people are finally recognizing that you saw it from a state level earlier, and you're recognizing that this generation is coming to a point where we don't want to live in Borrego Springs or Alpine. And by the way, Alpine's actually more expensive than the city of San Diego is, and it's 30 miles away. They want to be able to live in the same city that they work in. And even more than all of this is, if my wife and I, who have done all right for ourselves, can't afford to buy a house, then how's the person working at Target or Starbucks or a teacher or a police officer providing those basic services that so many of us rely on, even able to survive in this city, which I think is really, really frightening.
I think you're right that there's an increasing awareness around these issues in town. What's interesting though is there still seems to be quite a bit of tension about what to do about them, and I see it play out in my email inbox when I write about these topics, and you see it in city council when people propose solutions. I mean, what is the broad pitch on what you could do to seriously combat housing affordability as a city council member?
Well, I think it's one, recognizing that it's an issue is a huge step forward. Secondarily, it's kind of pushing for either faster permitting, ease of permitting, increasing our housing diversity stock right now in terms of providing the ability to build more townhomes or condos or duplexes. That first step of the housing ladder, which is the most important because it's easier to buy your second house once you bought your first house, that's essentially disappeared for an entire generation. We as millennials are half as likely to own a house as our parents are, as you were in 1975. And so just something that can be able to be afforded, even if it's a micro unit, allowing those permits a little bit easier, like they're building one in Little Italy. And somebody said to me, well, why would you want to live in like 300 square feet? Well, if I'm 22 and I just got out of college and I somehow have enough to save up to buy something like this, I got skin in the game. And I can then, it makes it a little bit easier to maybe buy that condo and then buy that home and move up the ladder from there. So just looking at a wide range of options, because the way that we'll get out of this, it has to come from the state, and certainly they're doing a lot of good work down there, up there. But it also has to come from the city just being willing to build more places where we know that can handle that sort of additional infrastructure.
So increasing the housing stock, particularly for market rate units, has not always gone over so well in a lot of neighborhoods, particularly in District 2.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think maybe the highest profile development fight in recent years happened along the Marina Boulevard corridor, particularly city plan to increase the development rights, basically, increase the density around a couple trolley stops along the Mid-Coast corridor. There was a huge backlash from the community. Council members Lori Zaff kind of immediately abandoned the proposal. The mayor followed with her, and the city walked away from an upzoning proposal along that Claremont Drive trolley station, despite the $2 billion transit expansion that was going on there. So that being what it is, public pressure being what it is, when we take these conversations from the aggregate and get specific about them, how would you have handled that situation?
Well, I think that when it comes to, the 100 to 75 folks that came out and spoke out in that 2014 hearing, San Diego is not Manhattan or Bay Park is not Manhattan. Yeah. I think that if we are going to stay with a 30-foot height limit in that area, then we need to have a conversation about parking underground parking often puts people and projects beyond affordability for developers or people that want to build more housing. I believe right now the going rate's like $75,000 per underground parking space, which doesn't pencil out for a lot of developers. So if we are going to keep the height limit where it is, then we need to figure out a way to kind of get around it in terms of not forcing either underground parking that makes everything more expensive or forcing that first level to be all parking so that you only have really 2 levels of housing above it. So I think that if we are going to listen to the community that says this is what we don't want, but we do need, this is a place that is ripe for some refurbishment. Those buildings that are built along Marina and inland of Vista have a 50-year shelf life, and they're at about 60 years old in a lot of places. It could be a very vibrant, walkable neighborhood. And I think a further explanation to a lot of folks that being near this public transit stop is actually a huge boost to the thing that you might find the most important, which is your housing value. And a recent study came out that nothing helps be more resilient against a drop in housing costs or housing price than being near a public transportation spot, especially light rail, trolley, something like that, because it's always going to be in demand. And as we move further and further away, I was speaking to a group of younger folks the other day, and I asked how many of them don't want to own cars. Almost every hand shot up. People don't want to have that additional and onerous payment, insurance, all that stuff. So, and plus, obviously, it's the largest percentage of our carbon pollution here in the city of San Diego. If we want people to get out of their cars, we have to push for buildings that don't have to have parking so necessarily and so onerously attached to it.
So it's not just the height limit that constrains some of this development that you're talking about, but also just, there's just certain areas that are single family neighborhoods, and they're not going to change. It doesn't seem like they're going to change. What corridors in District 2 do you think could handle more housing?
Well, I think that when you look at the San Diego Housing Commission's plan on where housing's supposed to be going, the beaches and kind of the west of the 5 area, it's a pretty light footprint in terms of the additional housing that they want to expand there. But if there's one place that you might want to look for it, it would be the Midway area. Mm-hmm. Sports Arena is going to have a master plan update. I never pronounce it correctly, but Spaywar, potentially that whole piece of property, if somebody builds them a smaller complex somewhere else, that whole, I think it's 86 acres, might become available to add a little bit more density, a little bit more walkability, a little bit more mixed use. The post office down there has recently been sold and will be moving over to mixed use. You have the Old Town Trolley Stop right there, which is a transportation hub. So I see that Midway is a real opportunity to kind of.
I thought the post office was going to be some like industrial or something.
Yeah, I thought it was industrial too.
Okay, I thought it was.
Yeah, I was
excited when you just said that.
Yeah. Well, regardless, I think that the Midway area is ripe for some additional housing. And you're right, for the most part, it is zoned R1, R2. And so where we can add extra spaces are rethinking places that are a little bit more commercialized already and might be ready for some master plan updates like Midway. But when you look at the San Diego Housing Commission's plan, I think 40% of the additional units that they're talking about building, and they say we need to build 150 to 220,000 units, could be happening in Mira Mesa, Mission Valley, Greater North Park, and downtown. That's a big bulk of it. So you add some infill housing in some places, converting abandoned lots over. Maybe it's 2 houses instead of 1 on a piece of property. That kind of stuff, that gentle density in places outside of the Midway area would probably be right for District 2.
Yeah. And so the other big topic that in your district is Airbnbs.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're telling us that they're going to have this solved in the next couple months, but I've heard that a number of times. I'm done believing it. So I'm operating on the assumption that this will still be an unsolved issue by the time whoever wins this race takes office, or in the case of Councilmember Zaff, retains office. What do you think that, between the 2 proposals that were most recently brought out, Councilmember Bree's plan, and then the plan that got 4 signatures from to move forward and then was eventually abandoned, which of those is closer to getting it right, and what do you think the things that are most important to remember on vacation rentals are?
So I supported Barbara Bree's plan, and went down, waited my 5 hours to speak at the event, at the meeting at Golden Hall. I think that by the end we knew who was a senator from Alabama before we knew what had actually been decided when it came to short-term vacation rentals, and got up there and spoke about how, for me, a big issue is corporations coming in with all cash offers that can take housing stock off the market. And for somebody who's a renter and eventually wants to buy their first home, that's something that I cannot compete with. So that is a big issue for me. And I really hope that the energy that is around this, because I'm a director on the Pacific Beach Town Council. I hear from a lot of these groups a lot about, protecting neighborhoods, and it's really become a conversation, at least from what they're putting out publicly, it's become a conversation about housing. And they want you to make sure that who's going to be our Little League coaches, who's going to be the, Brownie squad leaders, who's going to go to our dentist's office. We need to make sure that we have enough housing because this is taking housing stock off the market. So regardless of what happens, and I believe that Barbara's plan is the one that I don't know where it stands currently, and who knows, we will see in a couple months or whenever. But all of that energy, I would hope, then becomes a movement to make sure that we build that housing stock that they so continuously talk about when it comes to the biggest problem in our city.
I'm glad you pair the two, because I have these conversations with my parents and others all the time. They say, well, what about all it's chasing out the families and they can't live here and stuff. I said, well, that happened. That happened. There's a lot of older people in Pacific Beach, and there's a lot of younger people. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of families for various pretty obvious reasons. And if you really cared about that, you would consider also other housing supply issues. And so I'm glad that you pair both of those together.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're going to care about housing supply, you kind of have to care about the spectrum of housing supply issues. I guess that's just me.
Yeah, I think that they go hand in hand, because if we are concerned about housing stock dissipating, so I think that a number that I saw, verified or not, was 14,000 units are being used by Airbnb. I know that Voice of San Diego has done a lot of research about that, but let's just say it's 14,000. Well, if we have to build, again, 150 to 220,000, that is not a huge percentage of what we need to actually get accomplished if we want to have a city where everybody can afford to get that piece of the American dream. So this does need to be eventually, once City Council figures out what their short-term vacation rental issues are going to be and where it's going to stand, I hope that all that energy then transfers over, because if everybody cares about their neighborhoods, then this is something that would make sure that we have better neighborhoods moving forward.
So we are in week 1 of the City of San Diego's regulations, which were, it was, Scott and I talked earlier on the show that the city of San Diego acted faster than a lot of places in getting marijuana regulations ready for the new year. It's day 4 of this experiment right now. What do you think about what the city has done on this issue, and what are the kind of the things that are left to be decided in the future?
Well, I really appreciated the city being out ahead of this, especially with the 6-3 vote when it came to the number of CUPs that they were going to put out there, so that you could have up to 40 dispensaries in the area. Who knows, because of the regulations, whether 40 will actually be the number it ends up at. I was talking to somebody who suggested it could end up to be around 25 because of the limitations in terms of the 1,000 feet from so many different things.
There's only so many places that actually meet those.
Exactly.
I think you mean 40 businesses,
Yes,
like production,
sorry.
distribution, stuff like that.
Yeah. So 40. But still 25
Sure.
versus 40 is probably where it would end up to be. But I was very happy to see San Diego get out ahead of it, because this is a place that, California voted, I think, 61% for it. San Diego, more people came out in favor of it. And District 2 voted 68% yes on Proposition 64, which is the second highest out of any city council district in the city of San Diego, District 3 being the highest. Ocean Beach, unsurprisingly, was the highest percentage in terms of people. That it was, I believe, close to 80% voted yes on Prop 64. But even Pacific Beach, which is some 48,000 people, over 70% voted yes. Only one precinct in the entire district voted no on Prop 64. So we should be listening to the will of the people. And what the people want, clearly, is legalized cannabis and to be left alone to their own consumption devices. A lot of people that come up to talk to me are not the people that you would stereotypically assume are users of cannabis. And so I've talked to a couple of older military veterans who come up to me somewhat gruff and say, what are your thoughts about cannabis? And I say, I think we should listen to what the people said. I voted yes on Prop 64. And they say, good, that's what I wanted to hear. And so it is a broad spectrum of people that want to see this happen. But there are some issues that need to be taken care of moving forward, especially if we as a tourism city, what are we going to do with social consumption moving forward? That's something that they've kind of talked about in Denver, something that they're kind of working on in West Hollywood, whether it's consumption inside dispensaries, a kind of a coffee shop feel where you pay a nominal fee to bring your own, consume it edibly, not any other way, and you get some coffee and some tea with your kind of price of admission. So that's going to be down the line, and then kind of in expanding again, because right now I think only 11 storefronts are open. So there's 17 that have been permitted, another 10 or so that are in the permitting process. So making sure those open up, and that people that I think only 5 council districts right now have an open storefront. So in a city of 1.5 million people, 10 stores, that's a lot of people trying to get into. I mean, from what I understand, the lines were out the door at some of these places.
Yeah. What are there any open in Council District 2?
There are 2 open in Council District 2.
There's one in Bay Park,
Bay
right?
Park, yes, and one in kind of behind Sports Arena.
Okay.
And I think they've both been doing very well. They're in the right places for that kind of place. And so again, I think that we should be listening to what the community wanted, and District 2 is overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting possibility. I don't know if this will play out this way long term, but you put down all these regulations that you need to be X feet from this and X feet from this and this and this, that you end up making de facto decisions about where it goes.
Right.
And that ends up mostly being industrial areas for the most part. And you could have a situation where people vote overwhelmingly that they do want the drug to be legal for consumption, but they don't have to deal with it being anywhere near their neighborhood.
It's like the Encinitas Del Mar. They want it Amazon droned in.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
They want it dropped on their doorstep.
Right. So
But
like,
don't put it
yeah, like, I
anywhere.
mean, you could easily imagine 80% of people in Ocean Beach voting for it and not having any in Ocean Beach.
Well, and I think that's where delivery. So right now, the only storefronts are allowed to deliver right now in terms of providing. So and delivery is going to play an important part moving forward, because you do want to help people get their medicine that are maybe bedridden or can't move, or they don't have access to a car or public transportation, or say you lived up way up north and you're so far away from one of the dispensaries that you got to come all the way down. But we want to make sure that we also do the right thing. You don't want it next to a school. You don't want people using on the beach. You want to keep it to responsible adult use for the recreational side of it, while also protecting the medicinal uses for people that that use it every day and that enjoy it and it makes them feel better, which at this point we've seen enough evidence. I mean, I think opioid deaths dropped in the state of Colorado. Teen use was down in the state of Colorado as well once legalization passed there. So not to mention all the tax revenue that's come in. So this is clearly something that has been good for the state of Colorado. You've seen it work well in Washington and Oregon. So it's exciting to see what it will bring here in San Diego.
Well, so Council, do you want?
Go ahead. You got it.
Councilwoman Zaff's been doing a lot of work on the river and the problem of the homelessness on the river, San Diego River. But also, obviously, homelessness around the city has been a pretty big deal. So there's the thing I want to ask you about, though, is the city really did clear the streets in East Village. There was just a massive police mobilization, and then we kind of transferred hundreds of people from the streets to the courts to whatever after that. They're not allowed to go back. The East Village is a much different place on the street level. Is that the kind of decision you are good with? What would be your approach to it?
Well, you can't just, it's like the ink dot idea. They're not going to dissipate. They just go somewhere else. And so where I live in Pacific Beach, I actually put out a poll the other day and asked people what their biggest issue was. And homelessness was the number one issue in Pacific Beach, because a lot of folks that were probably downtown are now in Pacific Beach. They're now we are not doing enough to. You are not going to solve this issue with sort of leaf blower justice by moving the folks around to different areas of the city and hoping that the problem goes away. And that, to me, has been an issue here in San Diego for a long time. It's this idea that if you close your eyes and hope that things will get better and you open them up, and they're actually much worse than they were previously. So getting out there, and I talked to Gordon Walker at one point, the new CEO of the Regional Task Force on the Homelessness, where coming from Utah, where they dropped homelessness by 90% in Salt Lake City. He said, we have all the tools here. We just need the will to do it, to build permanent housing, because that is the tried and true method of doing this, to get people with a roof over their heads, to make sure that they have the services provided that are nearby or a quick bus ride or public transportation option away. And that's where the state, the county, and the city all eyes should be focused, whether it's an audit of city and county land that these facilities can be built on. We are going to just keep doing this, just keep moving people around unless we end up building these structures that have been proven in a variety of municipalities that this is the way that you put a dent in this crisis.
I want to hear a little bit about your campaign. First foray into campaign politics. How's it going? Do you like it?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's amazing to think that I've already been running for 10 months, and I have 6 more months to go. Mm-hmm. Due to the rules that changed in the city, you could now run January of the year before the election instead of June.
I think you would hope you'd have 11 more months.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I'm completely focused on June at the moment, but because, and one of the things that so excites me is this top 2 runoff. Measure K, I think, is an instrumental thing for District 2. In the past, primaries have been won in low turnout. June primaries, I think in 2014, California had the lowest percentage of eligible voters cast a ballot in June of 2014. So you have a really unconnected, kind of situation where you might not get full representation of the folks that are living there that are end up voting. So now that it's a top 2 system, I'm simply trying to come in second place, move on to November, and I keep saying that if you ever wanted to run for office as a Democrat, and this is very difficult. I mean, since the mid '90s, no sitting city council member has been beaten. Yeah. But man,
Valerie Stallings.
Yeah. So, but if you were going to stack everything up that would need to happen for a Democrat to win in District 2, I think you're somewhat looking at it. I mean, Hillary Clinton won every single precinct in District 2. There's a 10% Democratic registration advantage. You have a lot of young people coming out in droves all around the country. A lot of young people are getting in touch with my campaign, volunteering to help out, to walk precincts. And that's the energy that has been so excited. When I started this 10 months ago, I think that I was just didn't know as much as I do now. I keep saying that I'm a better candidate 6 months ago than I was 6 months ago. I'm a better candidate today, and in 6 months I'll be an even better candidate, because you learn so much. You have to be a sponge. You have to be willing to not only try to raise money, not only try to talk to as many people as possible, but try to gain knowledge, because city council covers a lot of stuff. And it's not just, to me, this is not as much a political position. You are not getting up there doing a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington kind of thing where you're yelling about Donald Trump and how terrible he is. You have to decide land use. You have to decide what's going to go on with
Recreation councils.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I at one point turned to my wife after excitingly reading about maintenance assessment districts in Mission Beach and what are you going to do about the fly problem there, the $40,000 that was going to be needed for that second trash pickup. And she turned to me and just like a wife who loves you could do and says, I don't care. And I think that if you want to do this job, it is the policy that has to excite you. And I guess that all those years playing SimCity when I was younger have somewhat been buried in my brain, have now come out because it is so fascinating to see how the city actually works, to see who's in charge of what, and to see what the city could really become moving forward.
What about the party side of things? Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember you being all that involved in the local Democratic Party recently.
The party has been interesting. You know, it's I think that the Democratic Party is in a wonderful position here in the city of San Diego. We have a couple of fantastic county candidates that are moving forward. And so my biggest hurdle, I guess, has been kind of that institutional relationships with people that are already in the Democratic Party, people that will kind of make these decisions going forward. But when I'm out knocking on doors, people aren't asking about, my endorsements or money or what clubs I've spoken to. They're asking about what issues are you going to solve. Here are my problems more than anything, and how are you going to solve them? And I think that's really what matters. That I so enjoy knocking on doors of people that live in all over the district and hearing what their concerns are, hearing what their issues are, and talking about them straight up and trying to tell them how I would handle that, where my thoughts and feelings are on that. And walking away with somebody says, you know what, you earned a vote here today is pretty awesome.
Well, Jordan Bean, running for City Council. Probably not the first time we'll talk. Appreciate, not the only time we'll talk. I appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, gentlemen.
The Voice of San Diego podcast is part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast to learn more about the Cura Chaos show about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business shows Startup Vault and I Made It in San Diego, and the rest of the shows in the network. If you like the show, go to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button. Or if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at kinsey@vosd.org. That's KINSEE@vosd.org.